Let me know if there's any kind of echo. We tested this out. There wasn't before. We're going to try this again. All right. So this is Wesley here. And this is kind of like, in my research about this whole situation, um, this is one of the videos that I found. This is 6 months ago where he's talking about this is Billy right here. Billy Carson is this African American guy here in this picture. I don't know if you guys have ever seen him, but he is all over the internet. He's got million. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on a podcast called Flagrant and dozens of others. He has been everywhere, and this guy is like a menace to Christianity. So right now, the internet is a buzz with all the apologetics just jumping onto this because it's finally this guy. Listen, he would not debate anybody. He's one of those kind of guys that he declares, he doesn't debate, what happened was uh, a mutual friend of this guy here was a moderator. We're going to see him in just a minute. His name is Mark, and he's not a really strong Christian, and he's kind of pulled between what Billy Carson says and what some really credible biblical teachers say, and he's kind of in the middle. And so he reached out to Wesley Huff to kind of come on a podcast and talk with Billy Carson and kind of hash it out, a little bit of a debate, right? Friendly debate. So here's how it got started. Um, this guy's been on Billy's radar or radar. Billy's been on his radar for a long time, but Billy had no idea who this guy is, which tells me a lot about him going into a debate that he didn't research who Wesley Huff is. So listen to what he says here.
A
This is how it got
popular
started.
figure. He runs an organization which seems to be very popular online. He was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I listened to that episode. And although there were some pretty ridiculous things being said, particularly about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that are just flat out incorrect, what I want to do in this video is I want to play and react to not the Joe Rogan experience conversation between Billy Carson and Joe Rogan, but actually the statements that Billy Carson says on Andrew Schultz's Flagrant podcast, because there he addresses specifically the Bible. And so he says a number of just like ridiculously outrageous things. But I'm going to play some things for you and show you why it's really important that, yes, we should be doing our own research, but also the people who are the experts also matter to a certain degree. Like, they're not right just because they're the experts, but there are people who know things in regards to the publicly available evidence that are just not common knowledge. And a lot of people go around saying and using the right words, but in the completely wrong way. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play and react to this in particular. Okay, here we go.
You said that they doctored the Bible. What's the earliest version of the Bible that exists?
One of the earliest versions is the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible.
Okay, pause right there. One of the earliest versions is the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible. So the Ethiopian Bible is written in a language called Ge'ez. And our oldest copy of that comes in the form of the Garema Gospels from potentially as early as the 4th century, more likely from the 6th century AD. But this is only the 4 Gospels. And they're very much a translation from the original Greek into the ancient Ethiopic language of Ge'ez. What Billy Carson appears to be talking about with the Sinai Bible, I believe, is Codex Sinaiticus, which is most likely our earliest copy of what we would think of as a Bible, in that it includes Genesis to Revelation.
Let me just say this, you guys. When I was researching Billy, and seeing some of the things that he was saying, talking about the Bible from Sinai, I could not find, anything that I thought that he was talking about. And it sounds like when he's talking that he's talking about a Bible that is actually written at Sinai, that somebody says it comes from the mountain, right? So like hot off the press, right? I couldn't find it anywhere. And it's because he was calling it something that somebody labeled on Amazon. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus, but they took the first part of Sinai, and that's what they labeled it as on Amazon. And so I didn't realize that. I was looking for something that was truly ancient and maybe a forgery, or I didn't know what he was talking about. I just knew that his claims that the crucifixion was not in there, and that there were 14, he says there were 14,000 differences between that Bible and the Bible we have today. And I just, that just got under my skin. So that's kind of how all this started when I was looking into this and how people were pushing me to check this guy out. Luckily, Wes was already hot on it, and I didn't really have to go very far in seeing what was going on. All right, back to the thing here. Still learning this new Zoom, you guys. Hold on here. There we go.
All in one single volume. It dates from the 4th century. We, of course, have copies of each individual book of the Bible that exist in independent scrolls and books that predate those two documents by centuries. But I guess when Andrew asks about our earliest Bible, what he's probably referring to is what the Bible eventually started to look like as a single bound volume, what we would think of it as today. It was normative, though, for both Jews and Christians prior to the 4th century to consider individual books as scripture without them all being bound in a single volume like we have today. But I think what he's talking about when he says the Ethiopian Bible is probably the Ge'ez Gospels, in the Garima Gospels, and the Sinai Bible is probably Codex Sinaiticus.
The earliest version of the Bible, or one of the earliest, is in Ethiopia. What are the differences between that Bible and, let's say, like the King James?
Okay, there are a couple of things. The first, the Old Testament is the Torah from the Ethiopian Torah.
Wait, the oldest Torah we have is also Ethiopian?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's not true. The earliest copies of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, or what's sometimes referred to as the Pentateuch, were written that are written in Ge'ez. Once again, that's the language of ancient Ethiopia. Those fall comfortably into the medieval era, and actually the late medieval era. We're talking 14th to 16th centuries AD. We actually know that Syrian missionaries brought versions of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, down into Ethiopia, into the kingdom of Aksum early on, and then those were translated into Ge'ez. But it is just patently false that this is the earliest Bible, the oldest Bible. We have fragments of Genesis from the Dead Sea Scrolls that predate the Ethiopian ones by over 1,000 years. So this is just, it's incorrect.
Oldest version of Old Testament, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
Oldest version of New Testament, either Sinai or Ethiopia.
So once again, no to the Ethiopian Ge'ez being the oldest New Testament, maybe to Codex Sinaiticus. So we have other Greek copies contemporary with Sinaiticus, like Codex Vaticanus and Codex Washingtonianus. If we're thinking of a Bible as a single bound book, then sure, that's Sinaiticus. But P45, of which sections are housed in Dublin, Chester Beatty Library, and Vienna Austrian National Library, those are our earliest collections of the 4 Gospels and Acts, all in one volume. And it could predate Sinaiticus by as much as 200 years. So we also have manuscripts in whole or in part from many individual copies of the Gospels in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So no, the Ethiopian Ge'ez sections of the New Testament, which is primarily just the Gospels, are not the oldest Bible.
What are the differences we see in these and then the newer versions of the text?
Well, what's interesting is the text, there's less mistranslations.
Less mistranslations, got it.
In the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible, there's about 12 to 14,000 differences than the more modernized King James Version.
And what are the differences?
Well, for example, Moses never crossed the Red Sea. He crossed the Sea of Reeds, which is a closer, much smaller and easier sea to cross.
So this is a good example that Billy really does not know what he's talking about and appears to have absolutely no contemporary competency in the biblical languages. So as a side note, I've heard him in other places like his Joe Rogan Experience interview claim he's dabbled in Sumerian cuneiform. And given his continued misguided and downright ignorant comments on other ancient languages like this, I highly doubt he has any actual understanding of Sumerian. Case in point, the Hebrew term Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. So in Joshua 24:6, when it says that God brought your fathers out of Egypt and you came to the sea and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea, that term at the end of the translation there is Yam Suf. So when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BC, Yam Suf was translated into Eruthra Thalassa, which literally means the Red Sea. So this phrase is the same term that the author of Hebrew uses when he recounts the Exodus story as well. But if the Exodus account in the Ethiopian Bible says the Sea of Reeds, that's because that is what the Hebrew calls it. It's not a different body of water. It's just Billy not knowing Hebrew and thinking he stumbled upon some sort of conspiratorial change, when in reality, it's just him unfortunately not knowing what he's talking about. And notice, Andrew is asking for differences, and Billy isn't actually giving any. He's sharing factoids and using a lot of the right words in the wrong way, but none of what he's saying actually has anything to do with the question actually being asked concerning differences in the manuscripts. So once again, Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. That's what the Hebrew Bible says. We draw the term not from the Hebrew Yam Suf, but from the Greek, which translates to Red Sea, and that's what it's called today, because that's what it was called eventually when the Hellenism took over the ancient world with Alexander the Great, and that was just the term that was used. So the English Bible uses the contemporary term that's drawn from the Greek translation of the Old Testament, but the Sea of Reeds is not a different body of water than the Red Sea.
Also, another mistranslation is the God. God is not supposed to be singular in the Bible. It's plural in all cases, gods with an S.
So Billy continues on his quest to prove to anyone who actually understands the biblical languages that he doesn't understand them, because the ending im normally indicates a masculine plural in Hebrew. So Elohim, at face value, looks like a plural version of the word El, meaning God, and the im plural ending. And so therefore you could mistake it for then being the plural gods. Now, in some cases, Elohim does refer to plural gods. The problem with this is that the word Elohim is what's known as a concretized abstract plural. And this is a function within the Hebrew language where a plural word is used in a singular sense. It's true that this is outside of the norm of standard Hebrew grammar and syntax, but it's not some sort of mystery. This is standard kind of learn Hebrew 101 stuff. And a concretized abstract plural operates in a similar way to, say, the English word sheep. So we can have 1 sheep or 50 sheep. It's the verbs around the word, in both cases for Elohim and for sheep, that tell us whether we're dealing with a plural or a singular. This is just a display of complete ignorance of how Hebrew works and operates as a functional language. I've heard Billy Carson say this elsewhere. It's just not true. It's just an example of how he doesn't know and understand Hebrew. And one simple way to see how this renders and was understood is to go to, once again, the ancient Greek translations of the Hebrew. So some of which predate Jesus by hundreds of years, and see how they understand and render the plural word God in the Greek theos, because you have a plural and you have a singular form of that word in Greek. And the context in the Hebrew and both the ways that it's translated into Greek give us an indication of how it should be used and how it is being used. But when Billy Carson says, well, you know, the word Elohim is plural and therefore it means God's not God, it's just him displaying that he doesn't know how to read Hebrew.
In the Bible, you have the gods are Enlil, and who's also known as Yahweh in the Bible.
Yeah.
And you also have Amen-Ra, the great Amen. He's, when you say the Lord's Prayer, that's Enki's prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, give us our daily bread, blah, blah, blah. That's Ptah's prayer, who's also known as Enki.
I think the kindest way I can put this is nonsensical. I don't know a better way to put it. Enlil is the Sumerian god of the air, okay? It's not Yahweh. While it is true that later Mesopotamian lore incorporated Enlil and worshipped him as the king of the gods, he's firmly one of a pantheon of ancient Near Eastern gods who are worshipped by the Mesopotamians. Yahweh, on the other hand, is the god of the monotheistic faith of Judeo-Christianity. And there are 2 prayers that I think Billy could be talking about here. And so one is the prayer of Enki for Ashurbanipal, but it reads like this. Here, I pulled some up for you. Okay, so it says, I, Ashurbanipal, great king, mighty king, king of the world, king of Assyria, king of the 4 quarters of the world, king of kings, prince who has no rival, who by the command of the gods, Ashur, Shamash, and Marduk, who rules over the upper sea to the lower sea, and has subjugated all rules, who provides butler to the gods, as Esagil, the palace of Marduk, and the spouse of the gods, whose doorbell I made glisten like the stars, and the firmament who repairs the damaged parts of their sanctuaries, who establishes my protection over the cult centers, whose deeds are pleasing to all the gods, and whose shepherdship is sweet in the black-headed people. May Enki make my enemy's name and his descendants disappear from the lands, and have no pity on them. Does that sound like the Lord's Prayer? No. Okay, so the other potential candidate is Enkidu's prayer in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but that prayer is a request for Shamash, the Mesopotamian god, to visit him in a dream and grant him favorable omens. None of this is even analogous to Enki's prayer. I don't know where Billy is getting this from. Friends, there is nothing even remotely analogous to the Lord's Prayer in any of these ancient examples. Also, Ptah, the Egyptian god of creation, and Enki, who is the Sumerian god of the creation, they have similar roles within their respective societies, but neither the Egyptians would have thought of Ptah as Enki, nor the Sumerians thought Enki was Ptah. We go on.
I'll give you one big translation that's off, is they say, well, Jesus was crucified.
Whoa.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
What happened?
It doesn't exist in the book of Barnabas.
So let's go to Codex Sinaiticus.
And let me just say, you guys, he has said this in 50 or more different places and podcasts over a period of time. Like, this is a major argument for this guy, and so much controversy that many on the fence Christians, Christians that are maybe very new and unlearned, haven't read their Bible, and they are easily swayed, right? These are the ones that fall victim to this kind of nonsense here, right? So we got to be really clear and knowledgeable about our Bible, about doctrine, about context, and be able to test all things, right? So this guy had been going around just making just blatant statements like this and claiming to have the actual book, but you will later see on a different podcast that we're going to see in just a minute, the actual debate that was taken on. It was hard to get this full version here, you guys, really hard, because Billy Carson was suing everybody that posted online. No kidding. And you're going to see that in just a moment where Wesley talks about getting served, right?
Now, you can do this for yourself. You can go over to codexsinaiticus.org and you can click See the Manuscript. This is put on by the British Library. And so what I've done is I've just pulled up the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27 in Codex Sinaiticus. And right here, you say, okay, well, it denies that Jesus died on the cross. Find it. It's at the top there. So I'm going to zoom in to up here where this is actually the beginning of verse 50, right? So it says right here, but Jesus again cried out with a loud voice and gave up his spirit, right there, spirit. Okay, Jesus cried out in a loud voice and he gave up his spirit. He gave up his spirit. This is language of death. It just is. I mean, you can go to any of the Gospels. Friends, they don't read any different. You can go to the Gospel of John. It's not like the Sinai Bible is something secret and magical. The way that it's being communicated here is if this is like, this is some secret that Billy Carson has uncovered. This is not. This is just a 4th century copy of the Bible. And so you can, go through the Gospels and you can read them. That's Codex Sinaiticus. So when he says the book of Barnabas, I think.
All right, you guys, sorry about that. My internet dropped out. It's one, the gremlin kind of thing. All right. Just when it was getting good there. Let me share this again. Hopefully it won't mess up the recording.
Yes, the Gospel of Barnabas denies the crucifixion of Jesus took place. But that's because it was written a millennia and a half after the events as an apologetic against the standard Christian beliefs of the time. So there are multiple historical anachronisms in the Gospel of Barnabas, including the statement that the event of Jubilees happens every 100 years. That's what it says in the Gospel of Barnabas. Now, Jubilee is an ancient Jewish practice, but in the Old Testament, it's every 50 years. But this was moved by Pope Boniface to every 100 years in the year 1300. So it appears that whoever's writing the Gospel of Barnabas is misunderstanding what that is. He's referring to what is, yes, an ancient Jewish practice, but then he's sourcing it not in the time frame of the ancients, but actually in the time frame of the 14th century. It also paraphrases sections of Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So we're talking about something that at its earliest is the 14th century, but is probably even between the 14th and the 15th century. So this is not an ancient document by any stretch.
So how did they kill him?
They didn't kill him. In Harvard Library, there is a book of Jesus' wife at the Harvard Seminary School.
So, yes, there is a fragment of the Gospel of Jesus' wife at Harvard. But this fragment has nothing to do with Jesus' death and is also a known forgery. I have an entire post on this debacle concerning the Gospel of Jesus' wife that you can check out. But this manuscript was a modern...
All right, so 6 months ago, he is on Billy's trail there, right? And then he gets into, and I'm kind of summarizing here because this I want to get through this really hard to get version of this debate. Like I said, there was some things that happened after this debate. Billy walks off. He leaves early, and Mike drops. In other words, but he has been defeated at that point. And then within a few hours at like 2:30 in the morning. And there's video of him on a ring cam coming up to the guy who posted the video, who hosted the debate, giving him a cease and desist letter from his lawyer. So he went straight home, got a letter from his lawyer typed up, and then went back and served these guys that if they didn't take down this video, or if they put this video up, he was going to be sued. Anyway, this is what kind of caught it for me here. This is Wesley after this happened.
Attempting to sue me. For those of you who don't know, I was invited to interact with Billy on a podcast that he agreed to come on. It was not his podcast, where he was notified beforehand who I was and what we'd be talking about. After that debate took place, Billy attempted to suppress the footage. That didn't really work. I've released clips from that conversation. Well, Billy does not want you to see those clips and has sent me a cease and desist letter. I was really hoping that this could be an opportunity for Billy to learn, to see the major errors that he's been repeating and turn this into a learning experience. I even offered to follow up with Billy in order to show him how and where he could find accurate and credible resources in order to make sure that what he was saying was verifiably correct going forward in the future, so he and his audience could learn and proceed knowledgeably. Billy did not agree. But unfortunately for Billy, agreeing to a debate, losing that debate, and feeling embarrassed about that loss does not constitute legitimate grounds to litigate. Billy, I will agree to all the terms and conditions of the cease and desist letter that you have sent me if you agree to run it back, sit down with me in person, and have another discussion. This is my formal response.
We continued.
Now, you guys, resources that we use, and this applies to us too. And by the way, the Torosov is the Leningrad Codex, and I believe CodeFinder is the Sinaiticus Codex, and then Keys to the Bible is yet another one. So we have three different ones that we can actually search, and there are differences. There's slight differences in it. And for instance, at a certain place, one type will have books in one order, like Daniel and Ruth and around Ecclesiastes. The books are kind of flipped, which is not something that was done diabolically. It was just how the people who put together those scrolls together in one book, it's just how they did it. The codes still work for both codexes. They just produce different codes from that point down, right? So resources, really important. And we encounter this even now with the Bible, with pseudo-apocrypha and some books that are clearly forged, like this book he's talking about, where he implies that Yeshua had a wife. It's not accurate at all, right? But yet this guy had been putting out all this stuff that can be easily verified, you guys. And people had been doing that, but nobody could get him into a debate situation where he could be exposed until now. And this is why this guy did not want you to see this video. So the host he's a baby Christian, and you can tell by the way he talks and stuff in this. But he's a mutual friend of Wesley and Billy. But there's also another one involved that kind of knows Billy a little better. And he was behind the scenes setting this up because he wanted to get Billy in front of a real scholar so he can get exposed, right? So this is kind of how it all transpired, you guys.
God would have him killed, but I don't think they have any historical evidence, as far as I know, as to what or how or why they believe that. I'm curious for you guys both, and if you want to, I guess, go first, Billy, as to how you came about, like the findings where it seems that Jesus was not crucified, or that's not accurate.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay, according to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. That Bible predates the King James version of the Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which according to some scholars, it's a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things in him. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love, that he came to.
Now, you guys, I said just a couple months ago when it may have been before I left Hawaii or when I got back. No, it was before I left. No, it was before. That, I was encountering, I had this female woman that I was talking to who was talking to me about, she found out she knew what I was doing on teaching about the Bible and stuff. And she started talking to me about Christ consciousness. And I really didn't know at the time, but she was basically spewing the stuff that she learned from Billy Carson. The second coming is really the knowledge of Christ, and it's really about, it's very new agey, very new agey. And what you can glean from this guy as you listen to him is he has a very strong contempt for the Bible for some reason. And he has this mission where he's going to destroy the credibility of it, right? So I was very pleased to see this whole thing take place because I was anticipating how I was going to confront the guy until I come across this, and I was kind of relieved that I didn't have to. So very interesting to see here.
To this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our conscience, and we can act on those incredible emotions and that understanding that the whole world's going to transform instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet. Not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I've perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show. I'm always like, challenge everything. Learn to critically think and continue to come to your conclusions. Even with Jesus, I'm not personally even waiting on that he has to come back to say, I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and consciousness is already, I can tap into that right now. So you don't have to wait for him to come back. For those that believe he does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead on for what Billy was talking about, I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife, which that's, yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me say, I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written, that made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out. Sure.
So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes, okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library, so you can go and see it. It's on display, and the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I ask for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever?
I'm looking for it right now to make sure I have the version that I'm looking at.
While he's pulling that up too,
this is really important.
Like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and linguists, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like me.
Linguists?
Cyanide, I keep thinking of cyanide, like the cyanide Bible. So is that like a version? So from my own knowledge that I know, when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible was how many different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day, how many different eyewitnesses and stuff there were. And they went on purpose to mention so many other names that they were able to cross-reference throughout history and throughout those times, from my understanding. And those were different things that I always thought were kind of interesting that I felt was a good concept of proof. And then I want Billy to answer. And also, I'm just curious, the Sinai Bible, where was that piece discovered?
I found the text where I was referencing, actually. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay, yeah. Well, so that's...
All right. So what he just did is he conceded to what he's been saying for a long time, you guys. He's been telling people for a long time. Now, this really disturbs me, because if you claim to have a copy of the Sinaiticus, and you claim that there are 14,000, and I'm a little upset that Wes didn't address the 14,000 discrepancies. But if you claim that you have this book and you've read it, and you can't clearly see that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and in John, it's all there, right? So that tells me, first of all, you're lying, right? That you did not read this book. You're throwing stuff out there for whatever reason. That's why I said I think he's got a very strong contempt for the Bible. Maybe he was harmed some way. I've heard him talk about Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons in his early family life and stuff like that. But clearly he has no understanding of the Bible, and that becomes really clear. And then it becomes very evident that he's actually bluffing on a lot of things, as you'll see here in just a moment here.
That's good.
So he just conceded. That's important, because this has been the premise of his argument, that the crucifixion does not appear in the earliest Bible, right? Which is a lie.
Let's deal with that too, because I've actually there are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery. And so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish, we see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian, and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it
Is that the
has the
papyrus by any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
material it's on.
I got that from Chat GPT, by the way. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to sound smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
Well,
so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Allende categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into...
Now you see what he just did? He conceded a second time. Now his second source that he says that he used. Now remember, he originally said it was in the Sinaiticus that there's no crucifixion. And then he says, oh no, I misquoted that. It's actually Barnabas. And now we've established that Barnabas is actually a forgery. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll accept that. And this guy's supposed to be a scholar. Actually brags in a couple of videos where he says he's the foremost expert in papyri, ancient texts, and all kinds of these ancient documents and stuff. He's actually bragging about it, right? But he's using flawed sources. Sources are really important, you guys. We can't, and we have things like, for instance, a good example is this thing I've had going back and forth with another ministry about the calendar. And their premise is they like to use the book of Jubilees and some parts of Enoch to, promote what they believe is the Sabbath and the calendar. And it's circular thinking, and circular ration, whatever that term is. It doesn't make any sense. You're using a flawed source to come up with a flawed doctrine. And he's done the same thing here. He's thrown a lot of shade. And remember, these baby Christians who have been kind of falling on the wayside, looking at some of the videos that this man's put out, saying that, the earliest Bible we got doesn't even have the crucifixion in it. They added that later. And by the way, Jesus didn't die on the cross. He was married to Mary Magdalene. And we know that because of this next book he's going to talk about, right? And then you got millions of people that believe that. It's really, this right here is more damaging than the false prophets, to be honest. This kind of stuff here, this guy puts out.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name again? I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that Mary Magdalene that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' Wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' Wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' Wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' Wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but
So you could basically go find any kind of text, any kind of literature, any kind of book, stitch-ins, any of that Anunnaki stuff, and come up with your own theories and your own teachings on that, right? And it's confusion. There's a spirit of confusion there, and that's what it brings. And we're going to see that manifest here in just a minute. This young man here, he's Yah bless him, but he's not a very good moderator. First of all, he doesn't have the knowledge. He should have a very good foundational knowledge of the Bible to moderate this, and he doesn't. And he kind of shows that here in a little bit. And when it starts going off rails toward the end, right now, Billy's kind of taking it. He starts fidgeting and getting uncomfortable a little bit later, and it kind of builds up to a crescendo toward the end. But you'll also see this moderator kind of jump in at inappropriate times when things kind of get hot between the two, and they're kind of answering back and forth. And man, Wes does a really good job in keeping his cool and being a professional in this, very, very professional and very sweet and nice in his deconstructing of this nonsense that Billy Carson's been putting out, you guys. So fascinating stuff here.
I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit.
Third time. Right? So he's just folding up like it's nothing. He has no argument. You would think a scholar who has based their thesis and writing books on stuff would have an argument, right? He doesn't even debate it.
Predominantly, from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation is a lot of...
Now, this is really interesting. He realizes that he just got stomped and a lot of facts there. Now he goes to attacking the Bible. Watch what he does here, because he's made a lot of statements about how the Bible has actually been copied from other books, like the Enuma Elish, and like we get the story of Noah from the Epic of Gilgamesh. How many have heard that? You've heard that before online? A lot of people pass that information around and try to discredit the Bible and say the Epic of Gilgamesh happened before the story of Noah was put in the Bible. Well, yeah, that's right. You know why? Because the people who tell the Epic of Gilgamesh were the sons of Shem, one of the sons of Noah. These were Shemites, and they were retelling this story in their history, you guys. And then we got the Israelites that come, and this is when it's recorded in the Torah and at Sinai and so forth, right? But it all fits. It's not that the Bible stole it from somewhere and we copied something verbatim. He says that a lot of the Bible was copied verbatim from other ancient books. And watch how Wes destroys that.
Of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation. The Epic of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code upon Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text. Meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Yeah, have you read the Enuma Elish?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enuma Elish for us?
Sure. The Enuma Elish is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal, and the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet or this moonlet that orbited, supposedly a brown dwarf, based on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side. And that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enuma Elish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the Epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argue that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here. They would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, it's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe I believe in it as a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics of quantum physics all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off with what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle.
And by the way, have you heard any of this from Genesis? He's saying that Genesis has pulled from this story here. Okay, so that's why this is really why this is absurd, because he says that it's verbatim pulled from the story of the Enuma, or the book called the Enuma Elish, right? Which is nonsense. But your average person don't know that, especially your young Christian, right? Or somebody that's searching.
I end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text. Okay,
that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. The separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it's the details that make the difference, and if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days.
The Bible's not going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There are certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example, separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here, or let me add it to the scripture or this papyrus, since it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So was this text discovered that makes a parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Okay.
So let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result. And you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as it's just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good. It's a mistake. And that you are not created in the image of God.
and there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, I mean, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. It doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in an office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that, you know, that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text. But what's the word for word? In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
All right, now I just got to stop right there.
So where do you get?
You hear what he says? He says word for word, and then Wes says, what word for word? And then Billy changes the subject and attacks the Bible again. Watch how he uses the plight of women and the argument of women. And this is kind of where it starts getting kind of crazy with the moderator and gets into a rant about jewelry and stuff and keeping the law and all this kind of stuff. But that's a tactic because he's already lost this debate already.
Get that from?
Throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are two aspects of the image of God. And so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit. And right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God is the same all the time, right? He's always good. God is all the same all the time, right?
But we do see that though in scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within scripture that do actually communicate. You know, Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of, you know, the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why when, you know, the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well within the covenant of marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God has both aspects?
It's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe.
How many would tell you, you know, that God's not a man? They've never been taught this.
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. You know, there are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity. And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine pronoun.
That's pretty convenient. I mean, for an all-knowing, all-loving God to understand that human beings are going to take that and abuse it to put their boot on the neck of women for eons. It's pretty interesting. Also, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, so hold on. Let me speak to that.
Wait, can I say something there real quick, guys? I have to.
Yeah, sure.
If it was only for the Old Testament, I would have a hard time following a lot of stuff. For me, like what you said, putting the boots on women and stuff, it was when Jesus came that when they were literally like, oh, if a woman, you can just accuse a female of having an affair and murder her, and that's like, okay. That he was he just reminds me of anyone that basically challenged everything. And people would say that it didn't contradict what's in the Old Testament, but however people were interpreting it, they were believing that they were following the Bible to women can't do this, you stone them if they have an affair or if they're accused of having an affair. And Jesus, you know, as we know the famous scene when they were about to stone her, he's like, he who hasn't sinned cast the first stone, basically saying no one's perfect. And was the first one that I know of that started like speaking to other tribes and other countries that people weren't supposed to, like they were so racist and prejudiced. And this is where my heart opened up, is like he stood for this love and this God that broke down all these barriers and just flipped what all the scholars and everything was saying on its head. And that's where I found that I believe that he was crucified, because he went so far like against the grain at the time. And I get what you're saying too. Like there's stuff where it's like, oh, that's convenient, you know, where human beings can add in that this is there and that's not. But something else that I always was curious. I'm like, you know, if especially the New Testament, if it was like written by man and stuff and pre-planned, I'm like, I think they would have done a better job of not making a lot of the people so like ignorant. The people that were like literally with Jesus questioning him half the time, like, bro, I don't know if you can do this miracle. And Jesus is like, dude, you just saw me yesterday turn water into wine. And I'm like, if they really, if I was writing a story, I'm like, I want everyone to believe this, I would make the people not like is questionable. It's like they have so many characteristics where the humanity in it is what like always drew me. And like even one thing in the Old Testament that David and Goliath kills Goliath.
Very frustrating. This guy just kind of hijacks the whole rhythm of this and just goes off the rail here for a few minutes.
A man after God's own heart. I'm like, if you're pre-writing this to be the perfect person after God's own heart, then he becomes king. You're going to like have the story end perfectly. But then he goes off to see, he's watching this lady bathe nude, has an affair with her, has her husband killed. Mm-hmm. It's like, but then goes on to keep praying to God and coming back to God, like with a humanity. And God's like, this is a man after my own heart. And it's like finding all these human flaws is, to me, showed so much of like the beautiful struggle that, and I'm not going off everything you guys are talking about, which is factual stuff. I'm just talking from my own experience of ways where I drew and continue to draw my own conclusions. And I'm much more about my relationship with God personally, with Jesus and God. It's the same, over worshiping the religion, because so many people can, as we all know, that's wars are created, slaves are taken. There's so many horrible things that have been done in the name of religion. And it's sad. And that's where Jesus comes back into the game to me. I'm talking you guys to me, to where he was like the one that was like gathering all these people of all these, like, what are you doing? Like, we're supposed to be here helping each other. This is about loving each other and coming together. Like, you're killing them because they eat meat on Tuesday and they don't eat bacon on Sunday, and you're literally like murdering each other. It's so messed up. So I get where people look at different organized religion and stuff, and they're like, this is horrible. Like, on behalf of Christians, I'm like, I'm fully apologetic for, what was it, the Crusades. It's like, in the name of Catholicism, there's so many horrible things that human beings have done. The devil. And I don't believe he's this dude with a pitchfork and a red tail. I think it's more comes, you know, and energy and thoughts, and comes and people, and it's like,
this is irrelevant to the.
And people are going to name things democratic when they obviously aren't. Doesn't mean we then judge democracy. I mean, think of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? Nobody thinks that that's an actual representation of democracy. So people are always going to abuse terms and ideas and concepts. The difference is, though, I think historically within Judeo-Christianity, you have this ethic that we were talking about before that I think is fundamentally different than what we find in things like the Enuma Elish, the Atrasis, and other things, in that we are created in the image of God. And actually, one of the earliest criticisms of Christianity are by individuals like Celsus, who is a Greco-Roman philosopher in the 2nd century, where he accused Christianity of being foolish, dishonorable, and stupid, and he called it the religion of slaves, women, and children. Why? Not because God used the masculine pronoun for himself and people were abusing that, because the concept that Christians believed in of everybody, no matter what your gender, your race, your social standing, you know, Paul says in Christ there is no slave nor free, there is no Jew nor Gentile, there is no Scythian or barbarian, there's no male nor female. You know, these things united people. And we can see there's a historian named Rodney Stark. And in his book, The Rise of Christianity, he actually says that you can track empirically the agency of women across the ancient world by the movement of Christianity.
So that, in other words, whenever an area became populated by Christians, we see a direct correlation with the privileges and treatments of women that expand in time when the surrounding culture largely didn't view women as being fully human. So I think we're always going to have abuses, but if there's one worldview that exists that gives agency to people and says that everybody has worth by nature of being just human, it's the Christian worldview. And that's where I think it's very different. So we can argue about why we think God should or shouldn't have revealed himself in his pronouns, but I think that's actually irrespective of the historical reality that we see within the impact of Christianity, particularly on the West, but around the world, and how it gives agency to the marginalized.
Wes, can I ask you one? So when because I'm always interested in this, like you were raised Christian. I always think about this, like my wife who's Muslim, and our beliefs at the core are so similar, but there's some differences. And I wonder, like, if I was born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where she was, I know in the Bible says Christ revealed, but C.S. Lewis is someone that I really respect, because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a think outside the box always, and we should be. No one should just be like sheep and follow what any of us are saying. Like, do your research on your own with everything, of course. But what led you, sorry, going back to C.S. Lewis real quick, he was a famous scholar who was once an atheist, set out on a journey to basically disprove the Bible. As he went to do that, he himself found out that to be like one of the most historically accurate written books, which really shocked him. He then became a Christian after that. He's done the Narnia movies, Lion and the Witch.
All right, so right now, in my opinion, very similar to what just happened earlier in this in this class, where the internet dropped out. There's something about electricity and technology and the gremlins that things are starting to happen. Right now, a spirit of confusion is crept in because this guy right here keeps doing this, and he'll continually interrupt Wes throughout the rest of this. Right, it gets quite frustrating to the point at the end of it, Wes's live stream starts cutting out, where he's dropping out, and you could see this. Well, it's evident of a spirit that's manifesting in that. It's interesting to see.
Which in the wardrobe or their books, they were movies when he passed away. But he has an amazing. I love people like him because he doesn't just act like, he always was questioning everything. He's like, why is there this going? Why are these little kids dying, God, when they're but something that he continued to come up with, which reminded me so much of Jesus and the love conquers all things too, is when so many people overly get caught up on religion over the relationship. And he's like, I've actually met some atheists that are closer to God without even knowing it. And I've met some Christians that are further away from God without even knowing it. And I believe that too so much. And I'm just really curious, like, as you went on your journey as being like a historian, studying biblical text, and then being raised, of the church, did you take it? I don't want to put what, did you take it upon like, whatever I continue to discover, I'm going to have to accept, like, say something you did find when you were in Egypt revealed differently than what you were taught. Like, did you kind of tell yourself, I'm going on a quest, like searching for truth without like a set conclusion to prove Christianity, knowing that it could go either way? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a bit of an unusual household in that my mom grew up in India, and my parents, when I was younger, I was born in Pakistan, and I spent a portion of my childhood in Jordan. I grew up in majority Muslim countries and surrounded by majority Muslim environments. And we had, a copy of the Quran in the room. In fact, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon, and for a little while, other documents in our house. These were things that my parents, although they never verbally said, these Christianity is true, therefore these are not forbidden. These are not verboten. The truth, capital T truth, of the reality of the world we behold can stand up against scrutiny and investigation. And I did do a great deal of that as a kid. My dad is a historian as well. He has a doctorate, and I grew up on him, reading the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But at the exact same time, the reason why I actually went to university with full intention of going into the police force.
Oh, wow.
But it was interactions with Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and accusations against the credibility of the Bible, which actually piqued my interest, because they would say things that I said that I thought, if that's true, of course that undermines what I believe. I believe that Jesus is God incarnate. If I can't trust the Gospels as reliable first century eyewitness testimony, then I might as well throw all of this away because I'm not going to believe a lie, even if it's a convenient lie. And so it was actually the exploration of eventually going into graduate college and then now in working on my PhD, the largest secular university in Canada, that got me thinking, okay, how do we investigate these things? What are the methodologies by which we go about to explore the origins and credibility of something like the Bible? And that investigation, with all due respect to Billy and the content you put out, has actually confirmed what I believe. You know, I'm dealing with the actual manuscripts. I travel to academic institutions, to other countries, and I look at these things and I read them. And it's a privilege to be able to learn languages like Greek and Coptic and Hebrew and Aramaic and dig into these things. And I think ultimately, I really appreciate what you said there, Mark, with your articulation of your personal relationship. And I think that's so important. But I think it's also important to remember that that relationship is based on something that's real and verifiable. And we can look into the evidence. You know, I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian, with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of a translation, but the original. And I think I found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence might not actually be backed up by the reality of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very small piece of my concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past. So that's a very small fraction. I mean, that's less than 0.1%.
All right. Now this gets really interesting because he realizes that Wes just summarized and just basically said, I just disproved it, everything that you've said about Christianity and proven that it's not true. And what he just says here, he tries to deflect. He's like, well, we've only talked about less than a percent of a tenth of a percent of the knowledge that I hold, right? So he's very egotistical about he likes to flex the knowledge, right? And that's why you hear him in just a moment go on this rant about, he goes off subject when Wes starts asking him about methodology. And by the way, that applies to us too, you guys. What he just said about going into researching things and the falsification, we should not go into a search biased. You have to step outside of that box and almost try to disprove what you believe, if that makes any sense. You have to go down all those rabbit holes to get to the truth, right? So it's the same kind of things that we can borrow some of these methodologies from what he's talking about. And he points this out, about credibility of things that you're pulling as a resource, right? Watch what Billy does in this. This is just kind of staggering to me that he reacts like this, and it gets worse toward the end. There's going to be a drop mic in a little bit, but yeah, watch what happens here.
And you talk about eyewitness accounts. It's convinced you that Christianity is real. There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's in the Bible. People have.
What do you mean? Can you give me an example?
The Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa. They experienced a culture that they claim came to this planet from Sirius B. They have the evidence that they knew these beings were from Sirius B because they have the instruments that show the orbit of a trinary star system that we couldn't discover until the 1970s with our modern technology. Okay, they understood not only the orbital pattern of Sirius A, B, and C, but even that B was a failed star, which you can't see it from Earth with the naked eye. They knew that it was a white dwarf. They even knew that they said that if you took a tablespoon of it, the entire tribe or 1,000 men couldn't lift the tablespoon. They understood mass and gravity as well. They were told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. And there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person. If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbal handed down knowledge to. And that next person then takes over and becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found all their information to be 1,000% accurate. Then you have the Hopi tribe of the Americas, indigenous tribes, Hopi tribe, Lakota tribe, also having engagements with these quote unquote star brothers, even having an account of them being taken underground, which you don't see just only in America. I just came back from Turkey. You have the people from Turkey and Mesopotamia also being taken underground into a place called Derinkuyu by these beings, by these people, a structure that's built 12 stories deep underground, that's made out of volcanic tuff, a very soft stone. And if you don't know what you're doing, it'll actually collapse. There's no evidence of any collapse. And it was thousands of years old. It was reused many times. So the mainstream story about what it was used for to hide from Romans is actually false. This place is ancient. And in order to build it, you actually have to have foreknowledge of how to construct this type of underground civilization that can hold 20 to 30,000 people, places for livestock, places for worship, with no sign of collapse. And you have to have hundreds of ventilation shafts. And I've been down there. Those ventilation shafts are cut through solid rock all the way down to the core. And there's even more. It links to other underground cities that are miles and miles away. As you get to the very base of this area, you can cut through and go to another location. But again, these people were taken under. Also, then you have the ancient Egyptians. Similar story. Major catastrophe comes. These people come and take them underground. Then you have the information in the Egyptian book of Going Forth by Day. More accounts by people, our ancestors, that have accounts that do not match up with the biblical text. And so all of a sudden we're saying that all these cultures, the Aboriginal people, I can go into them as well. I've gone for walkabouts in Outback, in the Outback, and the Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiadians. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come up with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be scoffed. And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forward, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
Oh man. Well, first and foremost, some of these texts are some of these cultures have written down information in caves. You've got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch. And we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B, a trinary star system accurately, and can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made that was given to them by these people. How do they know the shapes, the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in the solar system?
He's flexing his forbidden knowledge. That's the name of his channel. He's not answering the question. He's just flexing. Right. And remember, this started out as a biblical debate, a debate about the Bible, and in particular about statements that he's made. And in every case he's taken us down this rabbit holes of stuff that has no relevance at all. Right.
Other star alliances, they would use to have something called the Ziggy and plant and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on. That's not enough evidence that there's something.
Well, I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid. I am well aware, as someone who has done both investigation in the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as that?
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper or a parchment paper or a papyrus. So these people,
Right. So that's where internal methodological analysis.
some of it's actually written down. So I mean, it's the same exact thing. There's really no difference.
Well, no. So you do internal investigations to figure out when something was dated. So something like so when I used that term verisimilitude before, that's something we as historians are looking for. It's a term that simply means the appearance or likelihood of truthfulness. So when you do historical analysis, it's an inference to the best explanation. So you have proof and you have data, and you're extrapolating that data on levels of probability. So some things can be confirmed as high probabilistically true, and other things are lower in their probability that they happened. But there are different methodologies, different ways that you explore historically how that happens.
Well,
so for the Gospels, we look at
with the Dogon tribe. Scientists went there to visit the tribe, and they still have no answers because they used their modern science. They took the best scholars to visit these people, and they're still scratching their heads. Something happened there.
Sure.
And
I'm not even denying that necessarily, but the question is, okay, we need different levels of evidence and exploration, not just scientifically, but historically, to derive something as eyewitness testimony. Now we have mountains of that, and I'm more than willing to go into some of that with the Gospels as early eyewitness testimony that can be verified externally and internally. But nonetheless, the only reason I ask, Billy, is because I've listened to a fair amount of your content, and I'm unaware of the methods that you use to try to discern between what is an accurate source historiographically and an inaccurate source historiographically.
Well, I use getting in an airplane and traveling to these places, doing my own research, talking with indigenous cultures, and researching as much of the text that is available that I can possibly find.
Okay, so I don't dispute that, and I do believe you have done that. But I mean, even from what we've talked about, so you've researched the text, but when we talked about the crucifixion, everything you cited was either, and I mean with all due respect, false in terms of the Sinai Bible, because Codex Sinaiticus is just a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Gospels that we have today, or they were verified forgeries in terms of the Gospel of Jesus' wife.
You might be right. You may be right on that particular part of the topic, but like I said, that's less than 0.1% of the information that I hold.
Sure, but that was the original question. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, well, so I'm going off of what we've already talked about. So you said you explore the text. I don't deny that. But the evidence, by going off of what you have put forward in terms of the actual documentary evidence, is not just less than convincing in my respect. And I mean this with respect, because I think you have done a lot of research. You've traveled to these places. I have too. Like, this is what I do as my career. But I'm not really getting indication, because in history, we go to the primary sources in their primary languages. And when Mark asked, okay, why do you deny the crucifixion? The sources you used were not primary.
Okay, we're still talking about the same thing over and over again. There's so much more we can talk about here. We're wasting a lot of time. There's so much more. That's this amount.
Do you guys
so much
think
more stuff to talk about?
Do you think that all these different cultures and stuff describing these other beings, could those have been? I'm not an expert theologian or whatever, but like where it talks about war, I always want to personally ask you this too, where in the Bible it talks about like wars between the demons and the angels. There's a lot of crazy stuff.
Interesting that he's talking about wars with angels and demons, right? Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but pay very close attention that he was just deconstructing his whole thesis on what he's been saying, and Billy was getting really upset. Mark is sensing that because he's sitting right next to Billy, so he's panicking right now and trying to give them a breather, right? But this is a spirit of confusion that's descending on there. Watch what happens to the feed with Wes throughout the rest of this.
The Bible too, that you can prove it's been written, but it also takes some faith, because you can't physically see where there was wars between demons and angels and stuff fighting in the heavens. So there's tons going on. Obviously, could any of those have been, like, from what you've discovered or how people have written it, do you think those could have been demons or angels?
I don't believe in demons or angels at all.
You don't believe in them at all?
No, I don't believe in demons and angels. When you read Azazel coming down in the book of Enoch, coming down, and the first thing he does is teach people how to make knives and swords so they can cut a man's head off. You read, you see these quote unquote.
Where's that in the book of Enoch?
In the book of Enoch, Azazel. He comes down and he teaches.
Where's that in the book of Enoch? Is it the only reason I ask is because there are two Enochs, first Enoch and second Enoch, and only first Enoch is an actual historical amalgamation.
Okay. And then you analyze the fact that these angels are having sex, they're getting drunk. These are just people.
Whoa. Where are angels getting drunk?
Angels party, they go, they hang out with people, they go to war with people, they put on their outfits and go to war with people. This is in the Bible.
Where are they getting drunk though?
Well, they get married, okay? Whatever that means. But they're having a good time. Okay. Not married.
In fact, scripture says that angels
married, like Merry Christmas.
Not married. Mary, Merry. But the point that I'm making here is when you start to really analyze what these angels are doing, and you start to analyze how many people are dying in the biblical text, you start to say, well, how many people did Satan actually kill? And when you start doing the tally on the numbers, God's doing most of the killing in the Bible. It's not the devil that's doing all the killing. And God says in Isaiah, I created the good and I created the evil. Do what I say at the Lord. So he's saying that he's doing the good and the evil. That's what he's saying. Yeah. Now, my personal opinion on this whole thing, let me get this out because we keep going over the same rhetoric over and over again. My personal opinion is that the biblical text is a good book. Like I've said, I've got videos. My number one video on Twitter has me saying this. It's good text because if you actually apply some of the information that's in the Bible, you can get a good result, like you have done, Mark.
Right. I struggle with I know. I want you to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So because you can get a good result, but there's a lot of misinformation in the Bible. There's a lot of false information that's copied from ancient text. And if you go by that text, all of a sudden you end up with 400 years of slavery. You end up with abuse. You end up with divide and conquer tactics that separate people. You end up with people thinking that they're the chosen ones and they're the chosen people. And we've been promised this promised land so we can eradicate another race of people because this is our land, because God promised it to us. You have people that want to go on the papal inquisitions and torture and kill and murder over 80 million people. You have the American Holocaust, 111 million indigenous natives slayed. You have all this going on because of this text, which is set up so contradictory throughout its path across time. You get into the New Testament, slavery is still being condoned in the New Testament.
Was it?
Honor thy slave master as you would honor God or Jesus, it says, I believe. So in Ephesians. So
the Old Testament. I always thought but the God of the Old Testament too. Like I'll let you go real quick, but I'm just, and I know you have to go soon too, but I'm speaking.
Just on that note, do you think that was a really fair assessment of he's speaking of something that's in Ephesians where Paul talks about, slaves to obey their masters and stuff. Now, slavery was something that went on. It didn't have nothing to do with the Bible or with Christianity or the early believers. It had nothing to do with them. They weren't responsible for that. But hopefully you could see the clear disdain he has for the scriptures, right? Years and years of war. He even blames the Crusades, which, that was something that manifested from the Catholic Church, which was, something that was manifested from Constantine. That was clearly not Yah's will, that people would be murdered like that. That was clearly Satan that was doing that, right? So he attributes God to this, by the way. Another thing he rants on is, where in the Old Testament, where Joshua and Caleb and going in and they're slaying all the giants and the Kenites and the Izzites and all the ites, right? And all this murdering is going, or killing is going on. The Bible doesn't call it murder, it calls it killing, right? And he takes it out of context and he harps on this continuing theme of disdain with this guy. And bless the guy, Mark, here in the middle. He's trying to maintain peace between the two. Wes is getting really frustrated, and so is Billy in this.
As I challenged my own, so it was always, I'm telling you guys, this is where Jesus came in and changed everything for me. But like the Old Testament too, it is hard for me to read even Noah thinking God's like mad at everyone. Let's flood the whole world and murder all these people that I created.
That's pretty bad stuff.
But it seems so contradictory to, and I'm speaking, Wes, as a Christian, and I don't have the, whatever they call papyrus. There isn't. This is where people, but I continue to follow in my heart, but it's, so Jesus did not seem like that at all. But they say God's the same as then as he was now. Like time, he created time. So he didn't come down, as Jesus and change and evolve and then come back with new information and be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to flood and do. So these are more, I guess, like bigger moral questions that there's not necessarily, but that's where things like the Old Testament challenge me at times. And I know there's a lot of things where they correlate, and I've seen some cool things that come together too, but it's just like, man, to think like I'm going to flood and murder all these people that I created and then leave a few alive doesn't seem like what Jesus did at all.
No, it's a couple more points I want to make because he got a lot of talking in. It did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as sincerity of heart as you would obey Christ. That's slaves. Obey your earthly masters with respect and fear with sincerity in your heart, just as you would obey Christ. So it does say that Ephesians 6:5, but there's so many aspects.
That stuff is what.
And what is the context of what Ephesians is saying? So I think this is very important because we don't take text in isolation. So within Scripture, and this is why all the abolition movements throughout history have only been Judeo-Christian movements. There's never been an abolition movement that wasn't Christian. And actually, there's the recent work by historian Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, different Tom Holland, but his recent Dominion highlights this fact very well. This is not a Christian, but in it, he shows that going right back into the antiquity with the Cappadocian Fathers was the first abolition movement, and then into the British and the American abolition movements. These were fundamentally Christian movements run by Christians because of the idea that when Paul, who wrote that letter to Ephesians, says, "In Christ there is no slave nor free," he's breaking down those barriers. So in Ephesians, when he says, "Slaves obey your masters," he's operating on the socioeconomic context of what he's going on, and he's saying, hey, we have slaves and we have free people, okay? If you're a believing slave, if you're a slave who believes in Jesus as the Messiah, be equitable in how you are living your life. Reflect Christ accurately. And that's a movement that he is fundamentally working towards that eventually starts to completely take out the legs.
This is where we would argue, Wes. I would be, I love, by the way, I love that this is respectful. I don't feel this is all just three grown-ups talking in a healthy way.
I appreciate Wes.
And I think this is going to give us, but this is where you and I sitting down in the room, I would be like, great that you came up, but like, what were the methodologies did you use to conclude that him saying the slave be the master to the slave, you're able to interpret it, meaning that he's meaning that? Because I was also raised in the church, and I would question when they're like, oh, in the old days when they said women don't wear jewelry, that's a sin. You would know the exact verse. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, but that was just written because at that time, that was what they did. But then the next week they're telling me, but if you believe in the Bible, you either believe in all of it or none of it. I'm like, well, how come you're just, yes. And they're like, but it's okay for women to do that. Now, those are the things where it's like, we've got to be honest here. Like if you're respectfully challenging Billy, Billy's going to go and do research and be like, okay, now I want to see how to have, because we're all critical thinkers. Those things seem to just get so blindly pushed over when they're like, but that doesn't apply now. And it's like, I think there's more common ground than people think, and some of the words to recall, but also like, it's weird to me to think that he would be like, women aren't allowed to wear jewelry and this crap. And then Jesus came and he's like, none of that matters. And then for them to be like, oh, that only made sense then, but now it doesn't apply. But believe everything in the Bible all applies. You know what? Like as a Christian myself, this is why like I'm always like,
So there's a discipline called hermeneutics, and that's the methodology of interpretation. So there are multiple levels that you interpret something. So whether we're dealing with, say, the book of Ephesians, or we're dealing with Tacitus's Annals, we look at something and we contextually read it within the framework of how it's being written. So there's a historical approach where we look at the context. Okay, Paul is writing to a church in Ephesus. What's going on in Ephesus, and how is what he's saying in that city in what is modern day Turkey? How does that pertain to that particular time and framework? Where is Paul coming from?
How does it pertain to now, though, is my question. Because you're giving me...
Here's how I answer that question.
And I love you to death, Wes, but you're starting to give... Sorry I had to interrupt you. I believe in God. Like, I believe in... And Billy believes in God, too. I get why things are challenged and things need to be challenged, but it's saying that was to women then, but... being raised in the church and stuff, they say, but then they'll pick something and they're like, but that doesn't apply to them now, because in that context, he was talking to this certain town where they were having problems with I'm like, well, that's not written anywhere. And they're like, well, if you go to blah, blah, blah. And then they say, well, God is all knowing. So he perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible. I believe whoever created the universe, which is God, in my own opinion, is way smarter than any of us. Why would he leave something like that crap in there, that women shouldn't wear jewelry and all that, and then have in the New Testament that crap doesn't really matter? Like that's where it's like,
see what I mean about the spirit of confusion that comes in this, and it comes in through this young man here, because he should not have been moderating this at all. He should have had, like I said, a very good foundational, because a lot of this is foundational stuff, right? The issue with the jewelry and stuff, and while that was addressed, was about modesty, because in that time the prostitutes wore that kind of stuff, right? So that was the contextual. And again, even when we're looking at codes and things like that, we got to keep things in context, right? The context of the access term of, whatever we're looking at with relation to the ELS terms that come in there, and the relationship to the verses that go through there, right? All that matters. So there has to be a level of methodology in research, especially when we're using documents. And this goes to I wanted to share with you guys a document from the Vatican on another study. And we're gonna read that. It's an actual document from the time of Yeshua, and I think you're gonna really enjoy that. But it goes to the Shroud of Turin study. That's where you got to kind of vet things and not use mythological resources or sources, in other words, right? When you're doing that. Otherwise, you're going to end up in error. Okay. Just like this fellow here.
Like I have to believe that it's not I do think there is parts where things got written in, and I don't think they're the major things personally. Like whether or not Jesus was crucified, which I think is a major thing, because if he wasn't, that I've studied that a lot, that would challenge that would challenge the core of my whole belief system over whether or not it said if women can wear jewelry or something. But I do think that, and I don't know if there's an exact answer to this, but I do think, that's perplexing to me. The God of all wisdom would choose to leave some of that in there. It's like, why?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. There is an original audience, whether that's the ancient Israelite in the ancient Near Eastern culture, or whether it's the Greco-Roman believer in Jesus within the city of Ephesus. So as historians, and I mean, most of the books on this end of my shelf are what are referred to as commentaries.
Sorry, I got to cut you off again. Wouldn't God be smart enough to know I'm not just going to write to this demographic of this civilization now, knowing I'm a God who created the whole world and people are still going to be studying this thousands of years later?
That's what I was going to say, but I didn't want to come off.
Yes.
So I'm sorry. By the way, I'm the worst interrupter ever, and it's more of my ADD type thing of like, I get a thought and I got to get it out or else I freaking forget it. So I'm sorry about interrupting. Thanks for throwing me under the bus for that.
Yeah. So, how I would answer that is I would say this. So you do have, examples of where Paul is writing, and he's writing to a particular group. And so we look at, okay, what does it mean for a woman to wear and adorn themselves with gold in a first century Greco-Roman context, right? It has to do with the fact that prostitutes would wear those things. So we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the text? So
sorry, yes, I got to ask you again though,
meaning.
But how do you interpret that's what I've been, the reason I'm interrupting you is I've heard this, I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
I respect the crap out of you for how deep you go into studying the ancient texts and stuff, which is so important for the real root of it all. But they've told me that same thing, and I'm like, but why doesn't it just say that he was speaking to the women and stuff that were prostitutes of that time? Like, where does that correlate?
He's not speaking to prostitutes. He's talking about purity, and he's talking in the context of when he says, don't adorn yourself with jewelry. The original audience, and we can explore this by.
But you just realize how dumb that sounds? Saying the original audience, then later on saying, but now it's okay for this audience because these women and stuff.
No, because
I'm just saying, like, I get why people like if we're gonna, we got to be open minded. We're punching holes and other stuff to punch holes on our own, and even if it's agreeing, like don't you think that's a little? I get what you're saying. Like if prostitutes at that right now, if prostitutes all wear a red band around their neck and that signals what all prostitutes are, and it's like, don't wear that.
Prostitutes have tattoos, and a lot of women who aren't prostitutes have tattoos.
Right. I don't think it's as black and white that only the prostitute, and also you're only talking about in one little town. So my bigger question would be to God.
Well, in Greco-Roman antiquity,
like, why did you put that in the Bible? That just confuses everyone, though, because all these other civilizations are going to be reading that.
We have something we keep saying here. God didn't put that in the Bible. Men put this stuff in the Bible.
And I think that was some of the old, I'm telling you, Billy, it's for me, I think
you just used the word confusion. If you didn't notice, all that does is confuses us, right? This spirit of confusion is descending on there, right? It's offended that Wes has come on here, and you see Wes is being taken out, right? His internet is dropping throughout the rest of it. Billy takes an opportunity to strike at this point. He's already lost the debate. They went off on a rail, and the moderator made it even worse because I feel like he felt bad for Billy because they're really good close friends, and he did set Billy up. This thing goes deep. There's been lawsuits filed against three of these guys, three guys, because of this. You're going to see what Billy does here in just a minute. After he decides he's just going to wrap this up. Watch how arrogant this guy is. This is a spirit.
If it wasn't for Sorry, we got you back on, Wes.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Mark, but what I'm saying is I think we're missing a big point here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the Bible is written by people, men who are extremely flawed. And the evidence of that is what they did, what they took the information that's in that biblical text and what they did with it globally to other human beings, and how they even wrote about it in the Bible, how they enslaved and tortured people in the biblical text. In that case, even in the book of Deuteronomy, which
I want you guys to see how this is relevant to us, because we searched these texts, these very same ones, and probably even more with the Peshitta and you know, some of the other Greek texts that you guys have access to in Code Finder. So this is very relevant, right? And you may encounter this kind of argument, or right, as part of the apologetics in you know, how we believe, right? So we got to be able to answer and also draw from credible resources when we're trying to prove something, right? Credibility is everything.
One of the most brutal books out there, where everything is given okay to rape women, kill children. If one person talks against your Lord, go to that town and kill the whole town, burn the town down.
So brutal.
It's just too much. Like I said,
it turns people into salt.
The killing in the Bible is not being done by Satan. That's why I don't care. I don't believe in demons and all this other kind of stuff. Moses goes to the top. He talks to God. He gets his tablet. The first commandments are, thou shalt not kill. He comes down. As soon as he sees the people making a golden calf, he kills most of them. It's just like, come on.
I just got to correct. By the way, your 10 Commandments does not say, thou shalt not kill. Does anybody know what it says? It says, thou shalt not commit murder, which is a completely different word used, because there's times where Yah commands to kill, right? To kill the lamb or to go and kill, right? This is a different word than the word used for murder. Thou shalt not murder. So again, some contextual understanding of these things will, will clarify a lot of these errors, and we never do get to the 14,000 differences. Wes never addresses. I think that was probably where he slipped. He should have done that because that's a big deal, you guys. 14,000 errors, right?
And I've learned with some of these stories how it correlated with kill your first son, related to then what happened with Jesus. But I'm still like, in my head, they're like, that's so beautiful. He was willing to sacrifice his son as God would. And I'm like,
I don't believe
that's so mean that God,
I don't believe it's beautiful.
like, Jesus changed my whole story. No, when I'm in heaven, and I don't believe God is irrational, because he would be smarter than every one of us to be able to literally create everything. I would be like, God, I don't like, why would you tell that dude to kill his son?
I don't see any benefit in killing your own kid.
And then right at the last second, he's like, no, it's cool. I was just testing your faith in me. It's like, that seems psychologically, to me, when God's like, kill your own son, but then at the last minute, don't do it. Oh man, you proved your faith to me. I would be like, God, isn't there like I don't feel like you need to do that to a person. I don't think that's such a beautiful story. And I'm talking as a Christian. There's a lot of things with the Old Testament I struggle with, but it doesn't change my overarching beliefs. And I think there is things that are written in, maybe misinterpreted, that aren't as important as the bigger things, like the crucifixion and stuff of Jesus. Like, I'm hoping to God that your methodology of proving that is right compared to Billy's in that specific scenario. But in some of these other things, like, I almost rather them be disproved that God killed his, that God, and I've heard a lot of these different answers and stuff. And I know God gave us free will, and I understand all that too, but it's just like the God of the Old Testament and Jesus, it's hard to believe that they're the same person.
Yeah, I cut out quite a bit there, and so I think I missed it.
I'm not, you keep popping off, Wes, and I'm just...
I might get to say a lot of stuff that I want to say. Go ahead.
I'll shut up.
So let me just say this. So the most quoted verse of the Bible in the Bible is a version of Exodus 34:6, which fundamentally describes who God is, that he's compassionate and loving, full of grace and mercy, and abounding in steadfast love. And so, in fact, if you read the book of Jonah, the beef that Jonah has with God, the reason why he doesn't want to go to Nineveh, is because he believes that God is so loving that if he tells the Ninevites to repent and they repent, God is going to forgive them. So fundamentally, we have the picture of God consistently throughout the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, as being a God who is rich in love and mercy and abounding in steadfast kindness. And so we want a God who is just. And just to speak very briefly to the slavery issue, I mean, Leviticus 25 condemns by death the man stealing. So stealing someone and selling them into slavery. And the fact that the 10 Commandments are prefaced with, you are a nation who was slaves. I'm the God of Israel who brought you out of Egypt. So there's a fundamental difference, and there's lots of literature on this. I would encourage people to read my friend Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? He's written some excellent stuff. He's also written on Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament? He's a leading expert in the field of a comparative analysis of ancient Near Eastern war literature. And so there are very coherent explanations for these things, and that slavery within ancient Israel was very, very different from what slavery around the ancient Near East was like. And on top of that, once again,
slavery continued on.
When abolition movements happen, what's that? Sorry, Billy?
I said slavery continued on throughout the Bible with no problems.
But it was always undergirded by the fact that this was not the ideal, that this was something that should not be done. And even slavery within ancient Israel was fundamentally different than slavery around the ancient Near East. This is not a contested fact. You can look at the scholarship of individuals like Wright, who's written extensively on this. He's an ancient Near Eastern ethicist. And there's vast difference between the law codes in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and something like the Code of Hammurabi, which puts people on a tier system and gives different punishments depending on where they are within society. That's not true in ancient Israel. If you were a king and you stole somebody and you sold them into slavery, they would punish you by death.
But you steal somebody else's slave. You can't steal somebody else's slave. That's not a good thing to do, right? The point that I'm making here, I got to say something before I get out of here, is the Bible is full of contradictions. The biggest problem that we have is we're dealing with a civilization on this planet that is psychologically impaired. Human beings are psychologically impaired, this entire planet. We're living on an insane asylum. Earth is an absolute insane asylum. Mental illness has spread throughout the planet Earth like a complete virus. And when you take a text like the biblical text, knowing that human beings globally are mentally ill, this entire planet is a mental insane asylum. And I'm talking everyone. All 8 billion, whatever number of people we have now, are all mentally ill. And what I mean is there's different levels of mentally ill. We all have trauma that we're not dealing with. We all have internal issues. We all have situations shadow work that needs to be done. And some people are at higher levels of mental illness than others. Most of us are functional mental illness people. But when you take a look at a biblical text and you start going through this information, and it's the way that it's laid out, it becomes a proponent of more divide and conquer tactics. It becomes a proponent of racism. It becomes a proponent of slavery. It becomes a proponent of all these things that are dark and ill, including murder and killing in the name of God, which has been done how many millions of times. So my thing about the biblical text is it actually authored by the creator of the universe, or is it authored by the dark forces of, maybe, if this Satan is real, Satan himself? And the reason why I say that is because all-knowing, all-loving God, omnipotent and omniscient, that is creating not only this universe, probably most likely multiple universes, because a creator never stops creating, especially with infinite power, is now at some point going to author a text that is going to allow human beings to misinterpret it and take it in his name and begin to slave people, torture people, and enslave people worldwide, to claim that you're chosen ones, to set up a state of chosen people, and then to even claim that you have chosen land, and to torture and kill even more people, women and children, in modern times, still going on to this very day. To me, that doesn't seem like a very intelligent being, especially a being that knows the beginning and the end. So if you know the beginning and the end, you have a certain level of foreknowledge. You have advanced knowledge that goes beyond. You know what's the ending before the end even occurs. So you set up everything for success. Why? Because a genius solves problems before they happen. And I'm going to drop the mic on that.
With some of that too, I think came back on.
Yeah. I gotta get to this meeting.
Yeah, there's old stuff that it's hard to comprehend, but the thing that continued to change my life was Jesus, and the core of it was love conquers all things.
I can't miss this.
So yeah. Okay, go on.
All right,
we can do a follow up.
I really appreciate it, Billy. Thanks so much for.
All right. Yeah, that was hard to watch.
Hard to watch was the least of toward the end there. It was very difficult. And I could see the spiritual warfare happening right about 50 minutes into that, where you can see the spirit of confusion comes in there. He even says that, he even starts talking about spiritual warfare. Then the whole gremlin thing with the internet going in and out. Right. Obviously, hell was offended with all that information coming out, because this guy pulls you wouldn't believe, millions and millions of views on a lot of nonsense, and people have not called him on his stuff, right? And again, I had people messaging me and writing me about this stuff and the emerald tablets and all this nonsense for years. But it was more recently that I've got actual friends who follow a lot of this stuff, and so I've had conversations, and I was for the past month looking in on this guy's content, which is really hard to do, you guys, when you're researching something, or how to when you're preparing to be able to debunk something and use the codes as a way to do that, because this is the text, this is the actual text that he comes against. And yeah, Michelle, you got a question?
Oh, I just wanted to see what you were saying about that, because I've been coming up with the same type of arguments about Thoth, about the Emerald Tablets,
Yeah.
about all these things. And
I've done a lot of now I
Right.
have not read the actual text of doing that, right? You can save
Right.
yourself a lot of trouble because we have the access of the internet. Here's the thing, you guys, you can research any document.
No,
You could go,
what I was meaning is I'm trying to help baby Christians
yeah.
get out of this uh deception, and
Well,
this is a
Wes,
really important.
Wes's channel is a really good place because he covers a lot of that.
Thank you.
He's actually read some of these texts, and by the way, he has proven, and it's not hard to figure out. There are no emerald tablets. Nobody's ever seen them. It's one guy who wrote and supposedly interpreted an artifact that he's never produced, right? He never produced it, so nobody's ever seen it. Just what he said he interpreted, right? And it's turned into an occult thing, right? Well, Billy Carson, that's one of his main things, is this tablets of forbidden knowledge. And by the way, that's the name of his channel, Forbidden Knowledge. Well, it's all nonsense, and he tries to use things like that, and then a lot of false information, just outright lies going on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Flagrant, as we saw there, and several other. I think there was 50 others that he went on. He was saying the same thing, that the earliest Bibles that we have, the crucifixion's not in there, right? And that did a lot of damage to very young believers. And I had people pointing that out in some of their messages to me, and urging me to take a look at this. So luckily, there were other people that have. I mean, you can put in Wes. What is his? I forgot his name. Wes Huff.
Huff.
Huff is his last name. You can put that in, and it'll pull up. So, I mean, the apologists on YouTube, all the big channels, they're on fire with this right now, because a lot of them have, put out information trying to, stifle Billy Carson for a long time. It hasn't been something that I paid attention to, because for one thing, the information is nonsense, and I don't have time to waste, going into all that. So I appreciate other people doing that. About all I can do is look up some codes and see if the guy, what is. My sense was he has a very strong disdain for the Bible for some reason. And so there's got to be a reason for that. And you can kind of see that in how he was talking about the Bible. It almost like he has a disdain for the creator of the Bible, right? As he said there. That's the devil working through that man right there to bring confusion, right? Who's the author of confusion? That's Satan. And Satan will work through people, make them appear very intelligent. And by the way, this guy does not have any degrees. He claims to have a certificate from Harvard and from MIT, and both of those certificates is a class that he took that anybody can take. They're free to the public, and but he uses that in his video to make it appear like he's got a degree from Harvard and MIT. Which is, I mean, there's some information on YouTube about people that were friends with him, and that are being sued right now. The guy that's the third guy who wasn't in the video, he was a really good friend of Billy's, and he was the one that turned Wes and Mark on to do this podcast. And that guy was targeted by Billy specifically because he even did a video and called him a diabolical backstabber because they were like this, right? Well, the guy said that he'd known him for so long that he just called his bluff because he figured out he was just conning people with some of the stuff he was saying, right? If you could just go and research it yourself, the Sinaiticus, right? And look and see, well, oh my gosh, there's a crucifixion there. Why? This baffles me. If the man says that he has the book and that he's read it, wouldn't he know that the crucifixion was there? Why go and tell people that the crucifixion is not there if you've truly read the book? And this kind of confuses me. I want to believe that the man read the book, but I don't think he did. I really don't. First of all, it's in Greek. He tells people he can read these original languages like Hebrew and Greek, yet he gets a lot of stuff wrong in Hebrews, like you just saw with the word Elohim, right? And I've talked about this in this class here, how that word is, and they use the example like sheep, right? It can be a plural, and it can also be something that's singular, right? It's about the context and how it's used. Billy didn't seem to understand that. And I've seen this in other people who claim to be teachers on the internet with the same problem, with particularly like the word Kodesh, which is clearly a synonym in Hebrew. It means new moon and new month. But some of these so-called teachers that supposedly are, teaching Hebrew don't seem to know that, right? That's strange to me that you don't know at least a 101 level. And Wes pointed that out as well. That's not right for somebody that claims to be a scholar and the foremost leader of the world in these texts, and then you turn out to be a fraud, right? That's just wrong. A lot of people think it's motivated by money because this guy generates a lot of money with book sales, and he sells supplements and stuff like that. He's got 1 million subscribers on YouTube, so he does very well. And this is the first time I've seen anybody, actually get him on a podcast and do a debate. So, a lot of people that spin, and I know this because I've had this issue go on with the calendar in a particular ministry on YouTube that pull all their information from Jubilees and nothing from the Bible, by the way, to prove their. And I'm talking about the supposed Zadok calendar. Folks, there's no such thing, right? It comes from a few people that have put that together based off of what they interpret from Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were never a people called the Zadokim, I think he calls it. There's no such thing. Zadok was a man. He was a high priest. And it's also a word that means righteous. There were no priests called the Zadokim. The priests were called Levites, and in the time of Yeshua, they were exiled. They were not in the temple. It was a corrupted system by then, right? So, where do you get that? Well, just like Billy, you just make it up and you put it out there. And what it takes is somebody going on a debate and exposing it. Well, guess what? The other guy don't want to debate, especially about the calendar and using the only sources, because I asked for some rules. We use the Bible alone to prove. Didn't want to do that. You know what he said? I don't debate, I declare. Well, that's a sign of an arrogant person who, anyway, I won't go anymore. I don't want to rant about it. But anyway, Billy Carson, same kind of person. Dangerous person, putting out a lot of information, harming a lot of people, and it needs to be exposed. And, I'm glad Wes did that. You guys, good to see you, Marge. I saw you come in a little later. I did get this recorded, and I'm pretty sure it does not have an echo. And I did figure that out on Zoom. Anyway, next week, I think I want to transition. We've been talking about the Copper Scroll and archaeology. Last week we looked at Barry Rothman's website and how he's used codes to search for the Ark of the Covenant You know, there's Ron Wyatt stuff that we can cover, but I want to, since we're kind of touching in on these ancient documents, a couple of months ago, I started realizing that I could pull stuff from the Vatican that's been digitized. And one of those things is the actual letter that Pilate sent to Rome about Yeshua. You know, he actually sent a few letters about the man called Yeshua. And it's actually a very interesting read, and something in there that's quite remarkable that you can see that will, you know, kind of speak to what Wes was speaking about when we're validating a document and seeing whether it is valid, how you can internally check, right? So do they speak to one another, or do they contradict one another? Well, as you'll see in that document, it actually has some details that we can see in the New Testament, in the Gospels, which is really particularly about the day of the crucifixion. That is quite remarkable. And we know that document is legit. It is a legit letter. It's been protected for 2,000 years, and the Vatican has it. It's online. We can read it. It's quite fascinating. It's really interesting to hear him describe what Yeshua looked like. I think it'll touch you guys. It brings to the gospel story another dimension, is the testimony of Pilate. Anyway, we'll do that next week. You guys got anything before we close? I know I kept you late, you guys. I apologize for that. I just wanted to, you know, share with you what I've been, you know, involved with this week and what I've been looking at. Nobody? Okay. All right. It's good to see everyone. I will pray us out, and we will see you in Discord. All right. Abba Yahuwah, I'm just so thankful, Father, for each one of these students. I pray that you go with them this week, that you keep them nurtured in your word, that you reveal yourself in your word to them, Father, that you keep them protected from the enemy, but also bring them back at the appointed time. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right. Shalom to you guys.
Sure.
Shalom.